Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and I've got the new 2020 Dell XPS 13 with me here, alongside the brand new Microsoft Surface Book 3. So if you are looking for a new high-end 13-inch laptop, which one of these guys should you buy? Although I'll talk about pricing and also which one I would go for at the end of the video. So first things first, and just look at the difference in size between them. The XPS is thinner, lighter, and much more compact. Of course, the main reason the Surface Book is so much bigger is it's a 2-in-1. Just press this little button, and about a second and a half later, which is now up to 3 times faster than the previous Surface Book, the screen detaches and you have yourself a full 13-inch Windows tablet. So the Surface Book gives you the flexibility of using it like a traditional clamshell laptop, or you can then detach the screen and use it as a proper full Windows 10 tablet, or you can even then plonk the screen on backwards, like so, and then you can use it in this kind of stand mode, which is great for, giving presentations or probably more likely watching movies or something like that. Or then you can then push it right down and use it in what Microsoft call draft board mode, which is useful for taking notes, drawing, or sketching with your finger, or ideally the Surface Pen. So before we even get into the price and the specs and all that good stuff, you kind of have to ask yourself, would you get much use out of using this as a tablet or, back to front in draft board mode? If you would, then there's really nothing else out there that does it as well as this. If not, then you're paying a lot of money and also compromising on portability for this design. Speaking of the design though, and these two really are among the best looking laptops out there. This year's XPS lineup has had the biggest design refresh in about 4 years, and I love the new super thin bezels, the taller 16:10 screen, and overall it just looks and feels a lot more futuristic, but without compromising on build quality. The Surface, on the other hand, is a bit of a chunky monkey compared to the Dell. This unique fulcrum hinge does a great job of distributing the weight so the relatively top-heavy screen doesn't tip over, and of course you have the flexibility of switching the screen round, but you can see how much extra space the hinge uses, which adds to the overall size. Plus, with the pretty thick bezels, while useful for holding onto the tablet of course, take away a little bit from the overall aesthetic, especially side by side with the Dell. As for ports, on the Surface Book we have 2 USB-A ports, 1 USB-C, although it's not Thunderbolt 3, a full-size SD card reader, along with a headphone jack at the top and 2 Surface charging connectors. On the Dell, we get 2 USB-C Thunderbolt 3 ports, a microSD card reader and a headphone jack. So having Thunderbolt 3 on the XPS is more future-proof, and if you are one of the 5 people in the world who maybe plug in an external graphics card, or if you're connecting it to multiple high-res monitors, then that Thunderbolt 3 will come in handy. But I think for most people, at least right now, having a couple of USB-A ports on the Surface Book 3 will be useful, and means you probably won't have to bring an adapter with you, which you probably still will with the Dell. As for the keyboard and trackpad, well, it's close, but I do prefer the Surface Book. The keys have more travel and just feel a little bit more tactile. And the touchpad, while not the biggest, is I think the best you can get on a Windows laptop. Second only, I'd say, to the MacBook Pro. That's not to say there's anything wrong with the Dell. The well-spaced keyboard and precision touchpad are lovely to use, but between the two, personally, I'd pick the Surface Book. In favor of the XPS though, we get both Windows Hello face unlocking and a fingerprint reader built into the power button, whereas the Surface just uses face unlocking, although that tends to be what I use anyway. As for speaker quality, I'm actually going to call this a tie, because while they both sound pretty good, the problem with the Surface Book is it just doesn't get that loud. Even maxed out, it's fine, but if you're putting it a couple of feet away and you're watching a movie, it's not the loudest, but the quality is decent. However, while the XPS sounds better, it's a little richer and bassier, the sound does distort when you push it beyond 80%. But in the meantime, after the games console itself, it's the TV you play it on that will make the biggest difference to your gaming experience. But what about the webcams? Well, this is on the XPS 13, and at least it's on the top bezel, so it's in a good place, but it's a little bit noisy. The quality isn't the best, but it's passable. But then the Surface is in a whole different league. The webcams on these Surface devices are, I think, the best you can get on a laptop right now. And you can just see it's the exact same lighting. I've just gone from the Dell, and it's worlds better in terms of noise, quality, color, and also audio quality, because we get 2 new studio microphones on the new Surface Book 3. So if you're doing lots of video calls, web conferencing, then the Surface is definitely the best option. All right, let's talk about these screens, and they both look incredible. Now, there's actually 3 options with the Dell: a Full HD non-touch, Full HD touchscreen, and then the one I have here, the 4K touchscreen. It's a little bit simple with the Surface Book. There's only one option really, and that's this 3000 by 2000 touchscreen. So we're actually getting a 3:2 aspect ratio here, 16:10 on the XPS. I like both of them, and I prefer both these aspect ratios to the normal 16:9. But anyway, I think the Surface Book 3's sort of 3K by 2K res is a good halfway house between Full HD and 4K. So it's a little bit sharper, but not, massively battery draining. And that's kind of the issue I have with the Dell, is that 1080p is fine, but not amazing. But then I think 4K is a little bit overkill and just completely destroys your battery life. So between the two, I think this is a good balance. And it's a similar approach to what Apple does with their MacBooks and also Huawei with their MateBooks. But color accuracy is also important, and while they're both more than good enough for semi-pro editing, the 4K XPS actually comes out on top. I must admit, I do prefer watching movies and shows on the XPS though. It's sharper, we get smaller black bars, and it even supports Dolby Vision HDR. Now the next question is performance. Which one of these is faster? Well, this is where the Surface Book 3 shines, as while they both pack the same processors, up to the i7-1065G7, but the big difference is the Surface Book 3 packs in a GTX 1650 Max-Q graphics card, so we get a dedicated GPU here versus the Intel Iris Plus chip in the XPS, which can make a huge difference. We also get up to 32 gigs of RAM on both, and up to 2 terabytes of storage on the Dell, and 1 terabyte on the Surface. So these are the specs for the models I have with me here, although my XPS only has 16 gigs of RAM versus 32 on the Surface, so bear that in mind. But let's put them to the test, and in Cinebench R20, the Surface is 11.5% faster. However, in Geekbench 5, there was only a 1% difference between both the single-core and multi-core scores. But then, testing the graphics in Geekbench 5, and we see a whopping 3 times boost in performance thanks to the dedicated graphics card. So how does this translate into real life? Well, first let's jump into a couple of games, and as you might expect, the Surface blows the XPS out of the water. In Rainbow Six Siege at Full HD Plus with high settings, the Surface averaged a smooth 88 frames per second, versus a barely playable 27 FPS on the Dell. In Call of Duty, playing Warzone with medium settings, I averaged 54 FPS on the Surface, whereas the Dell just kept crashing on the main menu. So you can get away with a bit of gaming on the Surface Book 3, but really these laptops are designed for creators and professionals. So firing up a bit of Premiere Pro and actually scrubbing through the timeline and editing is a similar experience on both, as this is mainly using the CPU. So for a 4K edit, I'd recommend keeping the preview on half or a quarter res to keep things smooth. But it's the export time where the graphics card with its CUDA cores really comes into play. My 10-minute 4K edit took 41 minutes and 11 seconds to export on the XPS 13 versus 12 minutes 30 on the Surface Book 3. That's a huge difference. So I think the results are pretty clear that if you are thinking about doing some gaming or using this more likely for video editing, maybe a little bit of CAD rendering or 3D design or digital drawing, then the graphics card in the Surface Book 3 is going to make a big difference. Under load, the Surface stayed impressively cool throughout, although the warmest points were underneath and on the back of the screen. Whereas I measured a peak of 51 degrees Celsius on the keyboard of the Dell. That's hot, and it actually got quite uncomfortable to use, especially if you're trying to type or use the WASD keys if you're doing some light gaming. So this is the clear performance winner, but what about when it comes to battery life? Well, again, this is where things get a little bit complicated, because if you do go for the 1080p, the Full HD version of the XPS 13, you're probably going to get about double the battery that you will with this 4K version. But comparing the 4K one I have here with the Surface Book, 1 hour of YouTube at 50% brightness used 22% of the battery on the Dell versus just 11% on the Surface. So because this actually has 2 batteries split between the tablet and the base, plus it's a lower than 4K resolution, we get much better battery life. The 4K Dell gets me about 5 hours of use versus around 8.5 hours in my experience on the Surface. If you're not fussed on 4K, and also if you maybe on a tighter budget, then actually the Full HD XPS 13 will last the longest. So by this point in the video, hopefully you have a better idea of which laptop would suit you better. But for most of us, it's all going to come down to the price. So the new XPS 13 starts at a pretty reasonable $1,000 in the US, but here in the UK, we miss out on that super cheap i3 model, and instead the entry level is an i5 with double the storage at £1,400. Honestly, Dell's store is such a pain in the ass because there's huge differences between the UK and US SKUs available. You can also sometimes customize it on the US store, but you can't in the UK. So getting like-for-like specs and models is very tricky. But to get the model I have here with an i7, 16 gigs of RAM, 256 storage, and the 4K screen, it'll set you back $1,800 or £1,750. Whereas the Surface Book 3 starts from a whopping $1,600, the same in pounds, and actually that base model misses out on the graphics card, which I think is pretty important. So for the model I would recommend, it'll set you back £2,000 or $2,000, which is a couple of hundred more than the Dell, and I have to say it's almost unforgivable for a $2,000 laptop to come with just 256 gigs of storage. So undoubtedly, these are both very high-end and also very expensive laptops, but the question is, which one should you buy? Well, I think for most people, the XPS 13 with the Full HD screen is the best 13-inch laptop that you can buy right now. It's also a lot more compact than the Surface and a fair bit cheaper. I would say the 4K model is a bit overkill though. It halves the battery and it makes it a lot more expensive. However, if you're planning to use your laptop as a proper editing, semi-workstation or little studio, then while it is relatively a bit bulky and very expensive, I think the Surface Book 3 is the most versatile 13-inch laptop you can buy. Plus it has the best webcam, great battery life, the optional Surface Pen is ideal for artists and designers, and crucially we get that graphics card. Plus unlike the Dell, it never gets too hot. It's a genuinely lovely laptop. It's just a shame about the tight storage. So personally, I would go with the Book 3, but they're both incredible laptops. You really can't go wrong with either, and they are slightly targeting different audiences. This is a little bit more about performance, whereas this sort of favors portability. But if you want to find out more, I've put links to them both in the description. But how about you? Which one of these would you go for? Or none of the above? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. And if you'd like to see more from me, then don't forget to hit that little subscribe button below and ding that notification bell. And I'll catch you next time right here on the Tech Chat.